Assalamualaikum and good morning everyone. Thank you for being here today. We are honored to have this opportunity to present to you. Our topic for today is climate change and the Paris Deal. This is an important subject that affects all of us, and we hope to share meaningful insight and spark a valuable discussion. To begin, this is our team members, which will start with me, Nur Alia Sahira binti Rani with matrix number 2024 773701. The next one, Nur Fatiha binti Hamdan 2024 187651. The next one, which is Nazrah binti Yusaini 2024 351540. And the last one, which is Nazatul Fakira Aina binti Razali with matrix number 2024 366621. So the next one, here is our table of content, which will start with summary of the case study. The next one, ethics theory and concept, follow with the related chapter, and then question and answer, conclusions, and the last one, which is references. So let's dive in.
The Paris Agreement, signed in December 2015 by 195 countries, represents a historic global effort to address climate change. It commits both developed and developing nations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions collectively. While celebrated for fostering global cooperation, the agreement voluntarily targets a vulnerable to political or economic shift and falls short of the goal to limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. The agreement raises significant ethical challenges. Firstly, global responsibility. Climate change is a collective action problem. While all nations benefit from global emission reductions, many prioritize economic growth, especially developing countries balancing emissions cuts with poverty reduction. Secondly, intergenerational ethics. Today's actions or inaction impact future generations. Emission reductions require current sacrifices in economic growth to mitigate long-term environmental harm. This obligation weighs heavily on developed nations, historically responsible for the climate crisis. Thirdly, equity and justice. Developed nations with greater resources and historical emissions are called to lead in addressing climate change. However, its effects, such as extreme weather and resource scarcity, disproportionately affect poorer regions, highlighting issues of fairness and equity.
Ethics, a term we often hear but not always fully understand. At its core, ethics is a critical reflection on what should have been done and shouldn't be done. It is a branch of philosophy that examines the good and bad of human actions based on morality. In simple terms, ethics is moral philosophy. Ethical teachings provides norms, rules, and commands about what action should be taken and avoided, all while respecting human dignity. When applied to business, ethics transform into business ethics, a critical study of moral principles as they relate to business practices. Business ethics is not just about applying moral values, but about evaluating ethical and unethical practices in the business world. It's about assessing actions, decisions, and policies for their moral significance and societal impact. Now, let's dive into two main ethical theories relevant to business and professional ethics: consequentialist ethics and non-consequentialist ethics. Consequentialist ethics, also known as theological ethics, focuses on the outcomes or consequences of actions. If the outcome is good, the action is deemed morally good and vice versa. This includes theories like utilitarianism, hedonism, and egoism. The term teleological comes from the Greek word telos, meaning goal or end. On the other hand, non-consequentialist ethics, also called deontological ethics, evaluates the morality of an action based on duties, values, or principles of justice and fairness, regardless of the consequences. The term deontology is derived from the Greek word deon, meaning duty or obligations. Here, moral obligations are considered self-evident and intrinsically valuable. These ethical frameworks are essential in the business world, as they help address complex moral challenges. By integrating ethics into their operations, businesses create a systematic approach to evaluate corporate behavior and decision-making process.
The next one, which is related topic, The case study of the Paris Agreement is related to Chapter 6, Part 2, which is the topic of the concept of sustainability. So the first point that related for both case study and Chapter 6, which is ESG principle, that presented as environmental, social, and also the governance. Environmental components show us how to reduce the ecological footprint, while social components include the society's responsibilities, equality, and justice in dealing with the disproportionate impact of the climate change. Meanwhile, the governance is accountable in controlling the policy of sustainability of the country while balancing in economic growth. All the principles have been applied out from the case study and also the Chapter 6. Furthermore, demonstrate an intergenerational justice. In order to protect the environment, economic and social objectives also need to be met. In the context of the business, the organizations need to actively participate in global efforts so they can contribute to a green economy that does not affect the well-being of the future generations. As a result, they can combat the climate change and create the new markets and job opportunities to the society. This includes the renewable energy such as solar, reducing waste and fostering a circular economy model that reuse, reduce, and also the recycle to avoid the expansions of the gas emission. Finally, both Paris Agreement case and Chapter 6 are closely aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, which is SDG. So the Paris Agreement emphasizes to reduce the greenhouse gas emission and promote the sustainable development to the world. So it directly supports SDG 13, which is climate action. Meanwhile, in Chapter 6, balancing environmental and protection with economic and social objectives are in line with SDG 7, affordable and clean economy, SDG 12, the responsible consumptions and production, and SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. So both have the same ethical framework in emphasizing the needs for global cooperation in terms for achieving the world sustainability.
For the answer for question 1, I will discuss the profound harms of failing to address climate change, its impact on public health, and the challenges of reducing carbon emissions. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, it is an economic, social, and ethical challenge that requires urgent action. Let's begin by exploring the significant harms of inaction. First and foremost, we have harms of inaction. The most significant harms of inaction stem from the unchecked impacts of rising global temperatures. Ignoring climate change accelerates environmental degradation, leading to widespread biodiversity loss as habitats are destroyed by rising sea levels, ocean acidification, and shifting weather patterns. Coastal ecosystems and Arctic regions are particularly vulnerable, and coral reefs, which are essential to marine life, are experiencing large-scale die-off. Economically, inaction results in escalating costs. Natural disasters like hurricanes, floods, and wildfires are becoming more frequent and severe. These events damage critically infrastructure and disrupt agriculture, threatening food security and global trade. For example, Hurricane Ida in 2021 caused over 65 billion in damages in the United States, while catastrophic floods in Germany and Belgium led to hundreds of deaths and billions in losses. Inaction also exacerbates human suffering. Vulnerable communities face increased displacements, water shortages, and exposure to diseases. Beyond these immediate effects, inaction risks triggering irreversible tipping points such as the melting of polar ice caps or the collapse of rainforests. These changes could set the planet on a path to even greater. Next, we have public health impacts. Climate change significantly affects public health as well. Rising temperatures lead to more heat-related illnesses, respiratory conditions, and the spread of vector-borne diseases like dengue fever and malaria. Vulnerable populations, especially in developing nations, feel these impacts the most. A clear example is the 2021 heat wave in the Pacific Northwest of the United States and Canada, which caused hundreds of deaths and placed immense strain on healthcare systems. In addition to physical health issues, climate change often leads to mental health challenges, including anxiety and trauma resulting from climate-related disasters. This further exacerbates the public health crisis. The last one is challenges of reducing carbon emissions. Now, while addressing climate change is crucial, transitioning to a low carbon economy brings significant challenges. It requires major financial investments and structural adjustments which can disrupt industry and economy. For instance, Malaysia's green technology projects such as solar farms and energy efficient infrastructure in Malacca are important steps forward toward sustainability. However, they come with high costs, straining government budgets and increasing expenses for businesses and consumers. Last but not least, economic impacts on fossil fuel dependent regions. The economic impact is particularly severe in regions reliant on fossil fuels. Phasing out carbon-intensive industry can lead to job losses and social unrest. Developing countries face additional challenges in balancing the need for economic growth and poverty reduction with environmental goals. Malaysia's commitment to reducing emissions by 45% by 2030 highlights this dilemma. While it is a commendable goal, it requires difficult trade-offs such as potential declines in industrial productivity and higher energy costs. Unfortunately, these burdens disproportionately affect lower-income groups, adding to the complexity of achieving a just transition. In conclusion, climate change poses an urgent and multifaceted challenge. Failing to act leads to devastating environmental, economic, and social consequences, while addressing it requires overcoming significant financial and structural hurdles. Next answer for question 2, I want to discuss a critical ethical responsibility we all share, which is our duty to safeguard the future for generations yet to be born. This responsibility is grounded in principles of fairness, sustainability, and the prevention of harm. Climate change has made this duty more urgent than ever, as the choices we make today will shape the world future generation inherit. They cannot voice their concerns or influence our decisions, so it is up to us to act on their behalf and protect the resources they will need. Firstly, ethical obligation to preserve habitable planet. As the current generation, we have an ethical obligation to ensure that the planet remains habitable. This means taking action to preserve vital resources like clean water, fresh air, and fertile land. However, these resources are increasingly under threat due to climate change, rising sea levels, the loss of biodiversity, and more frequent extreme weather events, risk making these resources scarce for future generations. Global efforts such as the Paris Climate Accord, which aims to limit global temperature increases to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, reflect an acknowledgement of this responsibility. But agreement alone are not enough. Inaction could result in the future generation facing challenges we had the power to prevent. Next, we have responsibility rooted in fairness. Our responsibility is not just about avoiding harm, it is also about fairness. Think about it, just as we benefit from the work of past generation who protect the ecosystem or promoted sustainable practices, it is only fair that we leave behind a world capable of supporting life and prosperity. If we continue with unsustainable practices, future generations will inherit problems like environmental destruction and resource shortages, which problems that we could have addressed. Fairness demands that we make decisions today that don't unfairly burden those who come after us. Lastly, addressing vulnerabilities in developing nations. We must recognize that climate changes creates disproportionate burdens for vulnerable populations, especially in developing countries. These nations often have fewer resources to adapt to the impacts of climate change, such as food and water shortages or health crises. Without action, these challenges will only worsen, creating deeper inequalities for future generations. By addressing these issues now, we take shared responsibility to ensure a fairer and more sustainable future for everyone. To conclude, our responsibility to future generations goes far beyond simply mitigating harm. It is about ensuring fairness and equity. Climate change is a global challenge, but it is also an opportunity for us to create a legacy of action, compassion, and foresight. Together, we must act decisively to provide a world capable of supporting life and prosperity for those who come after us.
So the answer for question 3, there are 4 items to be looked while addressing climate change. Firstly, ethical responsibility. Today's actions are critical to protecting the rights and well-being of future generations. This principle calls us to prioritize sustainable practices and policies. If we fail to act, future generations will face severe consequences, including more frequent natural disasters. Next is practical solutions. Implementing carbon pricing and emissions trading system creates financial incentive for businesses to innovate and adopt cleaner technologies. This mechanism ensures that the cost of emissions are reflected fairly in economic activities. Redirecting subsidies from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources can transform the global energy landscape. This shift reduces reliance on carbon-intensive industries and accelerates the transition to a sustainable energy future. Next is global collaboration leadership by developed nations. Countries with greater resources and historical responsibility for emission must lead the way. This includes committing to ambitious emissions reductions and setting an example for others. Providing financial and technologies assistance helps economically disadvantaged countries adopt sustainable practices without compromising development goals. This cooperation strengthens global solidarity and ensures fair progress for all nations. Lastly, public engagement. Educating communities about the long-term benefits of climate action is essential for building public support. Clear communications helps reduce resistance to necessary reforms and fosters a shared sense of responsibility. Next, empowering individuals to make sustainable choices in their daily lives contributes to the broader goal of combating climate change.
So the next one, which is question 4, recommendations of environmental policy and actions. So there are 3 recommendations, which is shifting to the renewable energy sources, the second one, which is promoting circular economy, and the last one, environmental education and public awareness. So the main focus will be to shifting to the renewable energy sources. Global renewable energy sources are one way to reduce the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So the greenhouse gas emissions increase due to the burning of the fossil fuels that accelerates the global warming and extreme weather change. So in terms of that, the renewable energy sources can meet the needs of the community and reduce their concerns. So the example of the renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, and also the hydroelectric. The second one, which is promoting the circular economic practice, are also a focus in environmental policy and change. So the circular economy is an alternative to productions and consumptions that aim to minimize the waste and pollutions. In other words, the government needs to urge any business in the country to design the product that are implemented for various initiatives and provide a more holistic solutions where economies can grow benefits from the use of finite resources. In addition, it is easier to reuse, reduce the waste, and promote the recycling, which is the 3R. For example, electric vehicles such as Tesla play an important role in the circular economy because they are in line with the principle of reducing waste, conserving resources, and minimize the environmental impact by using a sustainable battery production and using end-of-life management. Lastly, environmental education and public awareness is a critical component of environmental policy and to align with the ethical framework. It can begin from the informal education, which start from the parenting lessons, parenting children at home about the basics of the environment and climate change to give them understanding towards the impact on the environment. The second one, which is from formal education, such as teaching and learning from school and university, from the lower level to the higher levels. Teach the younger generation early about the sustainability, biodiversity as their core subject and practice the practical activities such as recycling and planting the trees to introduce them to environmentally friendly habits. The third one, which is public awareness, is also important to reach a wider audience and to encourage the sustainable behavior. For example, community-based programs such as talk sessions on waste management and corporate social responsibility programs to lay the foundation for sustainability practice in daily life and environmental awareness.
So for the question 5, do prosperous countries have greater responsibility in climate action? Firstly, in historical responsibility, developed nations have contributed the most to global greenhouse gas emissions since industrialization. This historical role places more obligations on them to lead climate mitigations efforts and repair the damage caused. Secondly, economic capacity. Prosperous countries have the resources to invest in transformative solutions like renewable energy, carbon capture technologies, and sustainable infrastructures. They can also provide critical financial and technological support to developing countries, ensuring that climate action is equitable and inclusive. Thirdly is ethical obligation. Developing nations, despite contributing minimally to global emissions, are disproportionately affected by climate change through extreme weather, resource scarcity, and rising sea levels. Wealthier nations must address this inequity by shouldering a larger share of climate-related costs, including adaptation and mitigation measures.
Now I will answer question 6. Taking part in climate actions provide developing nations with a chance to transition towards sustainable energy sources, which not only help the environment but also bring economic and health benefits. By investing in green infrastructure and renewable energy, these countries can create jobs, reduce pollution, and decrease their reliance on imported fossil fuels, laying the foundations for a more self-sufficient and stable future. Importantly, developed nations can play a crucial role by supporting developing countries through financial aid, technology transfer, and capacity building programs. These initiatives would help them reduce emissions while still promoting economic growth. By sharing resources and technologies, developed countries can help developing nations achieve low carbon solutions at lower costs. Rather than exempting developing countries, we should embrace differentiated responsibilities. This means that while every nation should contribute to the global effort to fight climate change, the level of responsibility depends on each country's capabilities. This ensures fairness and acknowledges the historical context of emissions while still empowering all nations to take action. In conclusion, developing nations should not be exempt from climate actions, but by participating in global efforts, they can build resilience, foster sustainable growth, and help avoid the worst consequences of climate change for everyone. Through cooperation and shared responsibility, we can work towards a more sustainable, equitable future for all nations.
The next question, which is question 7, will it be ethically permissible to impose carbon emissions goals on countries and individuals and enforce them with penalties? In my opinion, yes, it is ethically permissible to impose carbon emission targets on countries and individuals and enforce them with high penalties that have given urgency action due to the global climate crisis. It is show us an intergenerational justice in order to save the future generation. The first reason to my answer of yes, due to the carbon that has been used by country has exceeded the planet capacity that leads to the greenhouse gases. As a result, it leads to the environmental impact, spread to the ecosystem, and make the lifestyle of human and future generation worse. As we can see now, unpredictable droughts have occurred until they cause human death. Furthermore, carbon emission has threatened the environment and led to the global heat. As a result, it has led to extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and biodiversity loss, and to tangible harms. In terms of that, it also affects the poorer nations and marginalized communities. However, in a positive and ethical way, implementing the stricter policy on carbon emissions can encourage the world to be innovative. By imposing the higher penalties on industry that use carbon above the limits, government can foster them to create the economic incentive which include the modern technologies that can mitigate the provide strong benefit to the society. This is aligned with the ethical principle of promoting the social welfare as it aims to improve the collective well-being of the people and it will build a sustainable future.
In conclusion, tackling the global climate crisis requires a unified and ethical approach that focuses on environmental preservation, social progress, and fairness for future generations. The Paris Agreements highlight the urgent need to reduce environmental damage, ensure social equity, and promote good governance. The consequences of inaction, such as the loss of biodiversity, economic instability, and greater harm to vulnerable communities, shows that we must act now. Key actions include shifting to renewable energy, adopting sustainable practices, and improving environmental education. Both developed and developing countries must play their part, with developed nations supporting the effort of others to aid technology and capacity building. Enforcing carbon emissions limits, though difficult, is necessary to drive innovations and ensure accountability. By working together with a focus on ethics, cooperations, and smart policies, we can create a sustainable future for all, balancing environmental, economic, and social goals to protect our planet for future generations.